The air in the courtroom was thick, almost electric, with a sense that something big was about to unravel. It wasn't simply the reporters or the throng of legal professionals that made the room feel packed. It was the silent expectation that today would signal a turning point. At the heart of it all sat Sean Diddy Combs, upright and composed, his gaze set on the judge's bench. Around him, his attorneys murmured urgently, their gestures rapid and tense, not the type of synchronization that precedes a routine day in court, but one signaling readiness for a huge encounter. As the judge entered, the room rose to its feet. Then a hush fell, heavy and absolute. She scanned the courtroom over the rim of her glasses, her eyes flitting briefly between prosecution and defense. "We will now hear the matter of the motion to suppress evidence," she declared. And just like that, the proceedings took a dramatic turn. Diddy's primary attorney rose, his tone measured but harsh. "Your Honor," he started, "we respectfully request that the court block the inclusion of recently submitted digital files. These materials were not obtained under a proper warrant and carry a severe risk of biasing the jury." A murmur rippled across the room. Journalists traded glances. Legal analysts murmured urgently into their recorders. A move to suppress evidence at this stage. Unusual, even brazen. But the prosecution stood undaunted. The prosecutor, confident and aggressive, walked forward. "Your Honor, the defense has been fully aware of this data for over 2 weeks. The files were recovered by a legitimate supplementary warrant, served through acceptable judicial channels. This challenge isn't about legality. It's about strategy." Her comments pierced through the courtroom like a razor. Meanwhile, the judge reclined back, her expression unreadable. Yet the repetitive tapping of her fingers on the bench signified profound thinking, and perhaps muted displeasure. But what truly lit this moment ablaze wasn't the legal sparring. It was what the evidence might actually contain. Sources close to the case claim the files include encrypted chats between Diddy and important persons related to the investigation, along with metadata that could directly contradict his stated alibis. If validated, these files wouldn't merely poke holes in the defense. They may shatter it whole. So the question lingered. Why challenge it now? Why wait until the moment of its presentation to make this objection? Diddy's attorney, fully aware of the repercussions, pressed harder. "This data was gathered under questionable circumstances," he insisted. "If we allow it, we risk undermining the fairness of this entire trial." But the judge wasn't moved. Her response was forceful, plainly cold. "I will not allow this courtroom to be used for tactical gamesmanship. If any party thinks they can manage this process, they are profoundly mistaken. Present your arguments." Suddenly, the courtroom shifted, from a place of nervous silence to a battlefield of high-stakes argument. The prosecution led the charge. The messages were recovered from a mirrored device willingly handed over by a close associate of the defendant, the prosecutor added. This device underwent standard forensic examination. No data was invented, modified, or misconstrued. The defense considers it prejudicial, but only because it discloses the truth. The reaction was subdued, but forceful. Jurors sat stiffly, told not to emote, but a flicker in their eyes, a small clenching of teeth, betrayed their intensity. Journalists scribbled faster. Meanwhile, Diddy's lead counsel examined every inflection, every pause in the prosecutor's delivery, looking for any thread to yank. Rising again, the defenders replied. "What's being submitted here is incomplete," he asserted. "This material lacks critical context and may confuse or mislead the jury. This isn't simply about data. It's about maintaining the right to a fair and impartial trial." His voice increased, not in anger but in determination. Yet even as he spoke, the prosecution handed over bundles of documents, technical logs, text outputs, timestamps. To the untrained eye, they were essentially lines of code. But to those who understood what they indicated, they were potential landmines. The defense wasn't only protesting out of principle. Beneath the legal terminology was a swelling tide of fear. Fear of what those files would show, worry of the narrative they might rewrite. The judge slowly flipped through the papers, her expression stiffening with every turn of the page. You pause. "Counsel," she said, gazing directly at the defense. "You were provided with mirrored versions of these files. You had time. You raised no objection in pretrial." Her voice was cold but final. And in that instant the war transformed. What began as a procedural debate had become a full-blown struggle over the essence of the trial. Over truth, over control, and over which side would define justice in the days to come. "You waited until now." The judge's voice sank to a lower register. Not loud, but obviously keen. The main defense attorney hesitated. Just for a second. But in a courtroom like this, a second is enough to tell all. "Your Honor," he eventually managed, "we believed the evidence wouldn't be used. Presenting it now feels more like drama than a search of truth." The judge tilted her head, gaze narrowing. "So your strategy was to gamble? To assume this wouldn't come up?" Her tone pierced through the tension. "That's not how we operate in this courtroom." Oppressive quiet followed. Not the sort that lingers. The kind that smothers. Every individual in that room could feel it. The collapse of a calculated risk. The awareness that the defense's timing might have just lost them everything. And then, in the midst of that hush, Diddy leaned in and whispered something to his lawyer. The attorney nodded, calmed himself, and stood once more. "We'd like to request a sidebar." But the judge had lost her patience. "No," she answered firmly. "This will remain on the record. Unless you can produce a fresh, legally supported argument, I will treat this as a delay tactic, and proceed accordingly." Without missing a beat, she turned back to the prosecution. "Continue." And just like that, the power in the room shifted. What was once a steady and systematic defense now looks noticeably unsettled. The prosecution, feeling the moment, leaned forward with the conviction of someone who knew the next hit was going to land hard. The prosecutor walked up to the bench, her movements measured, her eyes surveying the courtroom. In one hand, she carried the stack of printed messages. With the calm confidence of someone who had done this before. "And one," she began. "These aren't just random texts," she replied, voice steady. "They're directives, instructions, coordinated behaviors that speak to motive, timing, and intent." She pointed to a timestamp. This particular message was sent less than 2 hours after law enforcement conducted a raid on one of the defendant's properties. In it, a known associate talks about erasing hard drives and, quote, "getting rid of anything from the summer." Her eyes met the judge's. The summer is when the incident in question occurred. The gallery remained stuck. Even the staunchest fans in the rear, features formerly impassive, were visibly disturbed. Diddy, still composed on the surface, drummed his fingers methodically against the table, an almost invisible indicator of anxiety bubbling underneath. The defense shot up. "Objection. Speculation. There's no confirmation that message applies to this case." But the prosecutor was ready. "Then let's move to the next one," she added. In this exchange, the same associate asks if the club footage has been deleted yet. Hours later, CCTV footage from that identical venue, a vital location in our investigation, was found erased. She didn't call it a coincidence. She didn't need to. Still, the judge didn't interject. She was listening closely, letting it all play out, carefully digesting every argument, every piece of proof, every challenge. And then the prosecutor went further. "This isn't just about messages," she remarked. "We have sworn testimony from a recipient of those texts. That individual stated under oath. They were directed to clean house, to protect the boss. Our timestamps match their account. This isn't speculation. It's a pattern of behavior, confirmed and consistent." The defense objected again, this time claiming hearsay. Overruled. The court declared plainly. The rhythm of the prosecution's presentation was ramping up, each sentence harsher, more purposeful. The impact was cumulative and terrible. Diddy whispered again to his lawyer, who quickly stood. "Your Honor," he continued earnestly, "we request that this material be reviewed in chambers before being shown to the jury." There are severe privacy concerns and possibly digital rights violations. But the judge, evidently lacking patience for the reactive tactics, leaned forward. Counsel, if that were your concern, it should have been raised during the appropriate phase. Both parties were given adequate opportunity. The proof stands. And there it was. The moment the defense's control shattered. A line had been crossed, and there would be no walking it back. Then came the ultimate blow for now. The prosecution showed out a blurred screenshot. Identities protected but context plain. This is from a group chat, she explained. Not just associates. Members of the defendant's personal protection team. She paused, then delivered the name. One message was sent by someone we believe to be Mr. Gene Deal. At the mention of the veteran bodyguard, murmurs swept around the courtroom. The judge lifted her gavel slightly, ready to silence the room, but didn't strike it. In that message, the prosecutor said, Mr. Deal writes, and I quote, "Everything we discussed is already taken care of. Just make sure he stays quiet and off the grid till this cools down." The implications hovered in the air like smoke. And for the first time, the trial didn't feel like it was about legal arguments anymore. It was like the truth was fighting to be seen. It wasn't simply incriminating, it was bone-chilling. As the remarks from the group chat rang in the courtroom, the defense leapt to its feet, seeking the immediate suppression of the communication. Their argument was swift. The content lacked authentication, and without proof of the sender's identity, it couldn't be trusted. But the prosecution answered with frightening certainty. That phone number. It was registered to Gene Deal's personal account, verified and validated by their forensic team weeks ago. Then came the pause. It wasn't procedural. It was heavy, thick with consequence. The judge examined the room methodically, her expression set in stone. "This court will recess for 10 minutes, she replied coolly. "When we return, we proceed with formal submission of the evidence." And just like that, the pressure valve released, barely. The room exhaled in awkward stillness. Because what had just unfolded wasn't some regular dispute regarding admissibility. It was the beginning of a full-blown collapse of the carefully controlled narrative the defense had adhered to for months. When the court returned from recess, the air had altered. No longer tense, volatile. Everyone could sense it. Something seismic was approaching. The judge's entrance verified it. Her look was steel. Her patience worn thin. She didn't need to say it. Her face warned the whole room. "We're past warnings." The prosecutor resumed with a steady, scalpel-like accuracy. "The message from Mr. Deal," she began, "is not isolated. We've detected a series of communications across 3 consecutive days. Each one speaks toward a coordinated attempt to obstruct justice, erasing records, manipulating surveillance, and discouraging witness cooperation." She gestured to the courtroom's enormous monitor. And there it was, line after line of texts, shown in harsh, irrefutable black and white. The timestamps aligned with important moments in the case. The folks implicated were part of Diddy's closest circle. One message: "Tell him to keep his mouth shut. It's already horrible enough." A second, moments later, showed a huge movement of monies. $50,000 wired to a man purportedly at the same club on the night in question. The connotation was apparent. The defense erupted. "Circumstantial," the attorney yelled. "This doesn't prove my client had any knowledge of this transaction." But the prosecutor was unrelenting. "The account used," she remarked coolly, "belongs to a corporation solely owned by Mr. Combs. And the recipient, a former employee who fled the country shortly after that deposit landed in his account." She stopped just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. "This isn't coincidence. These aren't fragments. They're threads of a single, unified pattern." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Counsel," she asked, voice low, "do you have any direct evidence linking Mr. Combs to an order to silence this individual?" The prosecutor didn't hesitate. "Not yet," she conceded. "But the alignment of events, timing, communication, financial activity, And testimony builds a narrative, one that suggests a calculated effort to hinder. The dots aren't just there. They're connected. In the gallery, a woman grabbed her press badge like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. A man in the front row bent over his digital recorder, catching every word like he was chronicling history. At the defense table, Diddy remained very still. He wasn't leaning in. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't whispering to his lawyers like before. He only stared forward, motionless, inscrutable, a mask of composure or calculation. No one could tell. And then the prosecution dropped something no one was anticipating. Audio. This recording, the prosecutor added, bringing out a USB drive, was obtained legally from a wired informant during a post-incident meeting. It contains two individuals detailing a conversation they allege occurred with Mr. Combs about how to clean up the situation. A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge signaled for silence. The court technician cued the file. The first few seconds crackled with static. Muffled voices came next, unclear at first, then sharper. He said, "No phones, no questions. Just get it done. We had to wipe it all." "Who's we?" "You, me, Bill. All of us. You know the drill." The defense jumped to their feet. "Objection!" the lawyer yelled. "This is unauthenticated. We haven't even been allowed to vet the audio." But the judge remained unmoved. Her stare didn't waver. She didn't even blink. Because what had once been a conflict of motions and procedures had just changed into something far more dangerous. A war of truth spoken out loud. The prosecution didn't flinch. "This audio was submitted in discovery. Your team had access. If you failed to review it, that is not grounds for exclusion." It landed like a hammer. The lead defense attorney flushed deep red, turning to his team with disbelief. Somewhere, someone had made a critical mistake, missed something, and now the entire courtroom could hear the fallout echoing through the chambers. You didn't need to be a lawyer to know. Someone dropped the ball and it was rolling loudly. The judge lifted her hand. "Pause playback," she instructed. Turning to the jury, her voice was firm but calm. "You will disregard speculation. Focus solely on facts. You are not to draw conclusions until full context is presented." It was the right instruction, but it was too late. The damage wasn't theoretical, it was emotional, because this wasn't abstract anymore. For the first time, the sound barrier around Diddy's tightly controlled inner circle had shattered. These weren't vague allegations or courtroom hypotheticals. These were voices, real ones, with inflection, with intent, with implication. And outside that courtroom, the millions following every twist and leak knew what had just happened. The trial had transformed. This was no longer a legal chess match. It was a descent into a labyrinth of cover-ups, silence, fear, and exposure. The energy in the courtroom dropped. The air got heavier, colder. Something irreversible had just happened. When the audio stopped, the silence that followed said everything. Every person, juror, journalist, even security, understood they had just crossed a line. This was no longer theater. This was unfiltered damage. The defense attorney stood again, slower this time, more cautious, less theatrical. "Your Honor," he began, voice flatter, thinner, "we object to continued use of this audio without complete verification. Voice experts have not confirmed my client or any other named individual as participants." But the prosecution was already a step ahead. "Voice print analysis is in progress," she admitted, "but we have 3 witnesses, one of whom is cooperating with federal authorities, who independently identified the voices. And more critically, the timeline aligns exactly with verified communications and surveillance data." The judge didn't blink. "Have these witnesses submitted sworn affidavits?" "Yes, Your Honor. They are available for cross-examination." That sealed it. The defense knew the day was lost. Their objections were collapsing under the weight of corroboration. Every punch they threw was being blocked, countered, or simply ignored. Their airtight confidence, unraveling thread by thread. Diddy, usually defiant, didn't raise his head. His eyes stayed locked on the table, unmoving, unreadable. No smirk, no whisper, just stillness. The prosecution pressed forward. "We request permission to submit surveillance footage taken from the club's exterior the night in question. It shows the same associate, named in earlier text messages, entering the building with a duffel bag and exiting without it 10 minutes later. That's the same night the interior club footage was permanently erased." The screen flickered to life. Grainy but clear. A man walks into the club's rear service entrance at 2:13 a.m., medium-sized duffel bag in hand. At 2:22 a.m., he exits. No bag. "Where's the bag?" the prosecutor asked out loud, letting the silence after her question hang thick in the air. The defense pounced. "There's no proof of what was in that bag, or even where it went. This is speculation. Smoke and mirrors." But no one was buying it. The jurors, stoic until now, began exchanging subtle looks. They were following it. They were connecting the dots. The defense might have called it smoke, but everyone could feel the heat. Then came the final blow. The prosecutor held up a printed email, her voice steady. "We have here an internal communication between the club's head of security and a private investigation firm hired by Mr. Combs' team. It's dated 1 day after the incident. It explicitly requests access to the club's surveillance system, specifically asking for deletion of hallway footage between 1:45 and 2:30 a.m. She walked it to the evidence clerk, placing it gently in the tray. The request came from a proxy email registered under one of Mr. Combs' shell companies. Pause. This wasn't cleanup. This was calculated erasure. And this time the defense didn't even rise. There was no point. The courtroom had gone still, not silent like before, but still like the air had turned to stone. No words, no gestures, just the oppressive weight of realization settling over everyone. The judge didn't reach for her gavel. She didn't speak. She simply sat back, letting it all hang. Every piece of evidence, every line of dialogue, every click of surveillance footage, land and settle. Because this wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a story, and every juror, every journalist, every onlooker could see the shape it was taking. A timeline of vanishing files, whispered instructions, and shell games of silence and misdirection. At the center of it all sat a man who once controlled rooms with his presence. A mogul who had built an empire on charisma, perception, and power. And now he couldn't even lift his head. Under the unrelenting light of the court, the empire wasn't just cracking, it was crumbling. As the courtroom clock crept toward midday, not a single head turned to glance at it. No one shuffled, no one dared break focus. The air was razor tight. The prosecution wasn't just winning, they were commanding. The facts, the pace, the very mood of the room. And just when it seemed like they had no more cards to play, they flipped the table. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, voice calm but charged. "With the court's permission, the state intends to call a surprise witness." The phrase sent a jolt through the gallery. People shifted in their seats. Whispers stirred like wind through dry leaves. Diddy's legal team huddled instantly, voices low but frantic. The judge's tone sharpened. "This court does not appreciate ambush tactics. Who is this witness? And why wasn't their name included in your pretrial disclosures?" The prosecutor raised a sealed folder. "This individual came forward within the last 48 hours. They've requested limited protections due to the sensitivity of their testimony. Their identity has already been submitted to the court under seal, and they're currently waiting in the witness room." A long pause followed as the judge reviewed the documents, her face betraying nothing. The courtroom held its collective breath. Finally she nodded. "Very well. Bring the witness in. But if I detect any theatrics or delay, this court will respond swiftly." All eyes turned to the door. When it opened, the temperature in the room shifted. It wasn't just who walked in, it was what he represented. An ex-security consultant, one who had worked directly under Diddy's private detail. He wasn't dressed to impress. No tailored suit. No courtroom polish. Just a wrinkled button-down and the haunted look of a man who hadn't slept well in days, and hadn't felt right in years. He took the stand and faced the jury, steady but visibly strained. "I was hired to sweep private residences for surveillance threats, leaks and bugs," he began. "But that wasn't all I was asked to do." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Please tell the court what directive you were given after the night in question." The witness exhaled. "I was told to remove and destroy anything that connected Mr. Combs to the location. Emails, camera logs, visitor records, any trace. And I was instructed to ensure no backups remained." His words landed like a gut punch. "I was paid a premium," he continued, "to guarantee that nothing survived. And I did it." A stunned hush swept across the courtroom like a collective breath held too long. The defense erupted. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. We need proof, verifiable records, chain of custody, something to back up these claims." But the prosecutor had come prepared. "We have payment records," she said, "from a company within Mr. Combs's financial web. The transaction lines up exactly with the witness's timeline. He's also provided serial numbers of the destroyed hardware, which match the missing entries in the club's surveillance registry." The judge looked rattled, not shocked, but heavy with the realization of what this meant. And the witness wasn't finished. "I wasn't alone," he said more quietly. "There was another team working in tandem. I don't know their names. We operated in separate zones. But I do know that one of them was coordinating with Mr. Gene Deal. I heard the name spoken during the operation." At that moment, the courtroom didn't just cross a line. It obliterated it. The trial wasn't about allegations anymore. It was about truth. Brutal, unfiltered, irreversible truth. Diddy didn't flinch at first. But then a twitch. A subtle clench of the jaw. A fist tightening beneath the table. For the first time the facade cracked. The defense tried again. "We request a sidebar, Your Honor." But the judge had heard enough. "No," she said sharply. "We've danced around this long enough. The jury will hear this witness out, in full." The man on the stand leaned closer to the microphone. "I didn't come here out of guilt," he said. "I came here because it got too dark. I don't know everything that happened that night. But I know what we erased. I know someone's truth is buried in what we deleted." And there it was, that silence again. Not the same silence that followed the audio. Not the one that came after the surveillance footage. This one was heavier. It confessed. It lingered. It accused. Because now the courtroom wasn't just a battleground. It had become a reckoning. And no one, not the jury, not the gallery, not even the judge, could pretend they were watching anything less than the slow, methodical collapse of a legacy once thought untouchable. And Diddy? He sat motionless, wrapped in the wreckage of everything he once controlled. This wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was the fallout zone of an empire. It wasn't just a case anymore. It had morphed into a battle against power itself, a direct clash with the carefully constructed walls of silence, privilege, and protection that had kept certain truths buried for years. The surprise witness's testimony still lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. And just when it seemed the moment had reached its climax, the judge shifted the entire courtroom's axis. She leaned forward, looked directly at the defense table, and said something no one saw coming. "I am compelled to raise a concern of my own." The room froze. "In light of today's testimony," she continued, "and the defense's repeated efforts to suppress key material without formal objections, this court must now question whether your tactics are bordering on obstruction." It was like someone had cracked the courtroom floor. The lead defense attorney stood immediately, barely masking his alarm. "Your Honor, we've acted fully within the boundaries of the law. We are protecting our client's constitutional rights." But the judge cut in, her voice sharper, colder now. "Protecting your client is not the same as manipulating this trial's integrity. I have warned this courtroom before. Respect this process or face the consequences." Then she turned her gaze to the jury. "Let me be clear," she said. "This court will not tolerate the suppression of truth. We will move forward with the evidence. And if I detect any further attempts to stall or distort the proceedings, I will not hesitate to impose sanctions. I will also consider holding counsel in contempt. That moment was no longer just another twist. It was the turning point of the day and of the entire trial. For weeks, Diddy's legal team had performed a balancing act, ducking evidence, leaning on procedural delays, sidestepping direct confrontation. But now the court had drawn its line in the sand. On the other side stood a mountain of digital trails, insider leaks, and a defense strategy visibly cracking under pressure. And then came the blow that sealed it. As the judge called for recess, she looked directly at Diddy. "Mr. Combs," she said, voice firm but measured, "you are hereby advised that any continued interference, direct or indirect, with this court's ability to conduct a fair and impartial trial will result in personal sanctions. If any further evidence of witness intimidation, tampering, or obstruction emerges, you will be held responsible." Diddy didn't speak. He just nodded stiffly. But the message had landed. And the silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Outside the courtroom, news broke like lightning. The judge's warning became the headline, a bold, blazing statement cutting across every live stream and feed. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a spotlight, turned full force on a man who had spent decades controlling every camera, every quote, every narrative. Inside, prosecutors remained steady, not smug, just focused, because they knew they'd gained ground. The kind of ground that doesn't slip away. The jury had changed too. Where there was once uncertainty, there was now intent. They leaned forward, watching, absorbing. They weren't just seeing evidence anymore. They were seeing through the defense. The line between legal strategy and obstruction had been exposed. The judge's warning hadn't just shifted the day. It had shifted the power. From this moment on, every argument, every witness, every piece of evidence would be viewed through a new lens. Scrutiny, credibility, and truth. Not the kind that bends to celebrity. The kind that burns through it. And for the first time since the trial began, Diddy wasn't in control of the narrative. The court was. When proceedings resumed for the final session of the day, the shift was palpable. No one tried to reset or rewind what had just unfolded, because they couldn't. The judge's words still echoed, not just as a warning, but as a declaration. This trial had entered dangerous, irreversible territory. The old tricks were done. The courtroom games done. Now everything was under the microscope. The prosecution returned to the stand, not triumphant but sharpened, purposeful. They weren't chasing spectacle. They were dismantling something. A system of fear, secrecy, and unshakable power. One layer at a time. The next witness didn't have the drama of the last. But they didn't need it. A digital forensics expert. Composed, methodical, lethal in his precision. He began by explaining how deletion isn't destruction. How data leaves fingerprints, shadows, and how those shadows, if recovered, can tell stories. "We were able to recover remnants of communication logs from a wiped server," he testified. "Though the content was deleted, the metadata remains. The timestamps and file sizes show a surge in activity. Massive data transfers. Immediately after flagged conversations involving Mr. Combs' associates. You could feel the tension thicken again. Every juror leaned in. Every note-taker paused. The expert continued, presenting snapshots of digital artifacts, ghosts of deleted files, recovered timestamps, missing backups. And then the dagger. "We uncovered an internal directive," he said. It was sent to a system administrator. The instruction: remove all backups, local and cloud-based. The tone was urgent. The sender's email address was linked to a dissolved corporation, which we traced back to a holding under Mr. Combs' name. The defense objected, but it didn't matter. The room had turned. No one was wondering if anymore. They were wondering how deep it goes. As the day closed, the judge once again took the reins. "I will review all motions related to today's testimony," she said. "But let this be clear. No matter how powerful a person may be, no matter how well-resourced their defense, This courtroom belongs to no one. It belongs to the law. And the law will not be manipulated. It will not be delayed. And it will not be deleted. Then she looked to both sides. One long sweeping look that said everything. We reconvene tomorrow. Be ready. The gavel hit wood. And silence followed. Not awkward but heavy. Revealing. Because something deeper than testimony had happened in that room. A curtain had been pulled back. Not just on Diddy's defense, but on the illusion of untouchability. Outside, media outlets scrambled to update the world. Headlines exploded. Social feeds lit up. But this wasn't just about scandal anymore. This was about consequence. And inside that courtroom, one thing had become clear to everyone. This trial wasn't just about a single incident, or a single man. It was about the machine built to protect him. And the moment it finally began to crack,